Okay, so we're already encountering resistance on the case of Heidegger is not a transcendentalist in any legible sense, in any sense connected to Kant, or in any sense connected to the tradition. Um, this requires that we take our steps to show why this has even a bare plausibility, given that Heidegger himself uses the word transcendental. So we have a number of issues which are susceptible of application to this kind of research in general, which makes it all the more worthwhile. To start with, let's make a bare distinction between deciphering a text and understanding a text. Deciphering means we know what the words mean in some sense. So they have the word Notwendigkeit or Notwendig, and I don't know what that means, then I can't do anything. It's just letters, or I might not even know how to pronounce it, and so forth. If I can pronounce the word necessity or need, then I have deciphered the word. But do I understand the sphere of associations in which it's involved? To understand how the writer is using it, do I know the usage? I can often have a literal meaning without having the usage. And in philosophy of this kind, the research of this kind, not philosophy, let's say thinking, to use Heidegger's word, Heidegger sometimes speaks of questioning. He speaks of questioning in connection to the transcendental. But what are we actually talking about? So my contention is that here, even though Heidegger uses this word, it has only the barest link to the tradition, and it's very misleading to understand it as a super transcendentalism in connection to Kant. So why does that happen? We should remember that Heidegger came out with his Kant book about 2 years after he was compelled to put down his, I really want to say his worst book, almost his worst book, Being in Time, because he was compelled to write that. He didn't want to write that. He wrote it because he had to apply for full professorship. In other words, under pressures which are exterior to his actual research. He was compelled to put that down. So then he read Kant, who he had read since he was a teenager, in a way that was totally antithetical to the way everyone else read Kant, which is probably correct. And later on, remember there was the debate in Davos with Cassirer, and then Cassirer had written some strong critique of the so-called Heidegger's so-called Kant book. And when the second edition of that book came out, it had a little tag at the beginning that said, there's nothing I can do about this. Heidegger says there's nothing I can do about this, but this is due to the shortcomings of a young thinker, basically. I can't fix the errors of this whole book now. So he admits that the way he read Kant was illicit. He read Kant in the same way, in an analogous way, to his claim that the question of being was always there, even in Plato, even in the pre-Platonics, and that it was just unfolding until it reached Heidegger. But why should we think that? Why shouldn't we think if being is open, just as one says, for instance, Galileo took a certain turn into experimentalism, which we're still in now. If things are always open, such as the technological essence didn't have to come into being. If there's freedom in the movement of history, then Heidegger might never have come along. In any case, it's the question of whether we should take for granted that the question of being in Heidegger's sense was always there, laden in the beginning of the tradition, is a long question. It's maybe it's like Nietzsche said, it's the longest lie. is a question of the truth of being now instead of the truth. But that's a long question. So in a sense, this is analogous to the question of the transcendental. Heidegger saying Heidegger read the transcendental, his way of thinking, into Kant's project of what Kant calls the transcendental. So we can see already in some of the evidence I adduced in the last recording that the proper understanding of this term, we take it as a technical term, goes away from mere decipherment, a mere having the term and understanding it. In fact, we don't even have a mere decipherment. We just have a kind of X technical term. And then if we decipher it to mean something like the conditions of any possible experience, we're immediately talking about the transcendental subject, a subject being which has, and for Kant it was explicit that we're talking about sense experience. So there's an access problem. So this whole problem of access, or the all these issues which are illicitly hoisted on Heidegger by the people that Graham Harman hangs out with, and those kind of people that talk about the I forget the phrase they use, but correlationism, I think, is it. All that is illicit and doesn't actually fit with what Heidegger's doing. So I think there's part of what I'm aiming at. I don't think it's just a plausible. I'm trying to just establish here the bare plausibility, but I actually think it's not just probable, but it is so that this is just all that is a screen that deflects away from what Heidegger's actually thinking and trying to establish. So, one, there's the issue we should take in mind, the issue of everybody knows what a technical term is, but do we actually pay attention to that when we're making the distinction between two words that are the same but used in a totally different way when we come across them in a text? What is the horizon of associations? What is the understanding of the term that is wanted there? Okay, so that for now. I hope that if people hearing this who know something about the issues have objections, they would help me in the research by giving the exercise of confronting those objections, so that I could see if either maybe I'm mistaken and should give up this track, or whether actually in confronting the objections it will make the case stronger for removing Heidegger from any notion of this transcendence as it has been understood in connection to the tradition. One plausible caveat would be when Dugin uses transcendence in connection to the Eastern Church as those who keep open transcendence. That is very much like, at least like Leo Strauss's interpretation of Heidegger given in the opening to his Spinoza book, where he's talking about the I think he talks about the Tyndale. In any way, it references this difference between the Tyndale translation of the Bible as the "I shall be as I shall be," the futuralness, this openness, which is more like Heidegger. That's how Leo Strauss understands Heidegger's argument, in contrast to both the Jewish idea and then later, much more in a strong way, the Platonic and Christian idea that something can be said in a positive way about God, such that God becomes this idea of the agathon, so that one gets the formulation I am that I am, with the being held into eternal presence. So that sphere of interpretation of Heidegger coming from Strauss does match up in a way with Dugin's understanding of transcendence, and that will be one point where I want to try to make a differentiation, which is of a difficult subtlety. But I think if you could thread the needle, it will turn out to be of large consequence.